Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Harrison, and welcome back to Introduction to Finance. Today, we're answering a question every founder has to settle before they can do anything else. What legal form should the business take? When dreaming up the start of a business, many people focus on what the business model is going to look like, what markets they're going to serve, what products they're going to offer, but they often skip over the first decision that they'll need to make, and it ends up having very important consequences. In this problem, we're going to help three sets of founders figure out what type of business they should found. In our first example, we have Maya. Maya is starting a one-person tutoring service. She wants the lowest possible formation cost for her business, and she wants her income taxed only once as personal income. She needs no outside capital and faces no realistic lawsuit risk, so liability protection and access to capital don't constrain her choice. So how exactly do we approach a question like this? First, let's start with Maya's options. She's choosing among four forms of business. First, she could have a sole proprietorship. Second, she could have a partnership. Third, she could have a corporation. And then fourth, she could have a limited liability company, which everyone calls an LLC. Our first dimension is the cost to form. Out of our four business types, Maya wants the lowest possible, which is given to her by a sole proprietorship. It's the cheapest thing that there is to start. A partnership costs more, and not just in filing fees. She'd have to go find somebody to be her partner and then pay for that whole relationship, and she's running a one-person tutoring service. An LLC costs more than a sole proprietorship too, and a corporation is the most expensive by far of the four. So cost alone is already pushing her towards a sole proprietorship. Second is liability, meaning whether somebody suing the business can actually reach your personal assets. Maya has told us that she faces no realistic lawsuit risk, so this one is not something that constrains her. Third is taxes. She wants her income taxed only once. This will eliminate the option of having things like a corporation as her business form, because corporations are taxed once at the corporate level and then once at the individual level whenever dividends and capital gains are distributed. So we know that the corporation can't be her business form. Fourth, we have access to outside capital. Much like the liability issue, Maya doesn't need anything along this dimension, so there's no constraints for her. Then fifth, we have transferability, whether an owner can hand her stake over to somebody else. Maya isn't planning to sell her stakes to anybody, so this is again a constraint that's not going to push her in any direction. So two of the five dimensions did all the work here. The desire not to be double taxed pushed out the corporation as an option. Then the desire to have a low startup cost pushed out the partnership and the LLC as choices. So the best choice Maya can make is to found a sole proprietorship. We can apply the same formula to any of our business type decisions. Our second group is Dev and Priya. They're opening a food truck together. Because their food is not exactly the highest quality, they're worried a customer might get sick and sue them, and a lawsuit must not be able to reach their houses and personal savings in that circumstance. They also want their income to only be taxed once. So to solve this problem, we look across the same five dimensions, but this time two different ones are going to bind: liability and taxes. Taxes are going to rule out the corporation exactly like it did for Maya. And now liability is actually something that matters. It rules out the sole proprietorship and the general partnership because in either of those, the lawsuit could potentially reach your personal assets. So all three of those forms are out. What we're left with is that Dev and Priya should found an LLC, which will protect them from any lawsuits that come against their business. In our final example, we have three engineers who want to start a robotics company. Building their factory will take $200 million. This is far more money than any of them have on their own, so they're going to need to raise capital from thousands of outside investors. And those investors insist on being able to sell their stakes easily. This time, it's the last two dimensions that'll end up binding: access to capital and transferability. In terms of access to capital, it's much easier to raise money as a corporation than it is as a sole proprietorship, partnership, or as an LLC. The reason for this is actually very closely related to our other dimension, transferability. If you want to raise money in the form of equity, it's very easy to do so in a corporation because you can just sell more shares. Once you sell more shares onto the open market, you end up receiving cash in exchange for those. That's exactly why when you're trying to raise money to the tune of $200 million, it's much easier to form a corporation than it is to operate as any of our other three business types. So our three engineers should found a corporation. So what did we learn today? We learned that there's five key dimensions that help us decide what types of business we should run. These dimensions are cost to form, liability, taxes, access to outside capital, and transferability. Through looking across these 5 dimensions, we can decide which business type is the best for our situation.